So this was around back a few years ago. I don't really remember, but this happened to one of my friends who happened to be living next door to a neighbor back in 2018. Now, my friend at the time of the story, I am going to call her by the name Kelly. Kelly was living with her parents and her younger brother who was 16. Now, at the time of the story, she was around 21 years old. The new neighbors had just moved into a new house not far from where she was. The old neighbors that she had in the past were pretty nice, but unfortunately they had moved to another state in the US. They moved to the US as they found better job opportunities and wanted to start something new. Now, at the time, Kelly was sad that her had left, neighbors had left, but she was curious about the new neighbors. The new neighbor seemed to have a kid, was a man. He appeared to be around Kelly's age, and he seemed pretty nice. There were no other kids that moved into the house besides that boy. He seemed to be pretty nice, so she really decided to warm up to him a bit. Now, at first, the boy came over for the house the day after they moved in, with a basket of goodies, saying that he was new to the neighborhood and wanted to make some friends. Now, at first, Kelly thought this was generous of him, and he seemed to be quite nice and enjoyable. Of course, the parents seemed to enjoy it quite a lot. However, it wasn't until something really went odd. Now, with this guy, his name was Jeff, and he seemed to be pretty chill. Of course, things started to get really weird with Jeff's weird requests. I don't even know why, but for some reason, Jeff started going over for to Kelly's house nearly almost every day. Now, at first, it wasn't really anything major, and she just shrugged it off. But it wasn't until a few days later when Kelly was watching TV when she looked up and she saw that Jeff was staring at her through the window. It was freaking her out, so she ended up telling him that he needed to leave or else she'd be calling the cops. He left, and of course, that's when the next day she decides to go and talk to the neighbors about him. She went over and talked to the neighbors, Jeff's parents, about him and about the fact that he was peeping Tom pulling a move and watching her from inside the house. Now, at this point, the parents honestly said they would talk to him, and that was the end of it. It wasn't until maybe at least a week later when Jeff never came back, and it honestly really confused Kelly as to why Jeff never came back. She thought that maybe he gave up on trying her or something, so was just going with what she thought. However, it wasn't until maybe about a week or two later when she ended up waking up in the middle of the night to sound of police sirens in her neighborhood. She looked over and see that there were police cars across the street from her place. Honestly, they were just at her neighbor's house that was lived across the street, but she was confused as to why there were police cars there. And she then saw that Jeff was being in handcuffs, forced into the back of the police cruiser. Now, she was confused as to why Jeff was there, but if she had to guess, the fact that he was peeping Tom at her house, he probably did the same thing or did God knows what to those neighbors. At this time, though Kelly was still in college, but of course she honestly had no idea what Jeff was doing or anything, and she's never heard from him since. Of course, the neighbors did move at least a week later, and that was the last time Kelly ever saw Jeff. She's not even sure why Jeff was doing this, but she had a feeling that maybe he had issues or maybe he was just some psychopath or something. That is a question she's never going to get an answer to, and she doesn't even want to know what is up with Jeff's mind. So, Jeff, I hope you burn in hell. Now, this was just happened to my friend Charlotte recently. This was about maybe at least a few days after she moved into her new apartment. Now, she and her husband moved into an apartment that apparently was on the third floor. On the day she arrived there, it was pretty hectic. Things needed to be unloaded from the moving truck, getting settled in, etc. Of course, she had met a couple nice neighbors who had welcomed her to the neighborhood, but however, there was this one neighbor that honestly was not really the best neighbor. Of course, this new guy shows up at her house, and she ends up showing what seemed to be a plate of cookies, as if he's welcoming her to the neighborhood. She seems joyed and thanks him for it and takes the cookies. He introduced himself as Jason, and Jason seemed to be a pretty nice guy. However, it wasn't until maybe a few weeks into the move, Jason started appearing at front of her apartment door, which made Charlotte a little uneasy by this. Kyle at one point asked him why he was there, and he pretty much just said that he wanted to see Charlotte. Of course, this was getting a little creepy as he was acting really strange, but it wasn't until maybe a few days later where Charlotte ends up coming home to see him pounding on the door, thinking that she was home when she wasn't. Of course, he said that it was just his habit and he apologized and moved on, but Charlotte wasn't buying any of what he was saying. She told Jason to leave the property or she wouldn't hesitate to call the cops and report him, so he ends up walking away. When Jason arrived at the door, she ends up not answering the door, knowing it's Jason. Jason started getting a little clingy and weird, but it wasn't until maybe a day later when Charlotte was at home when all of a sudden her hears her door opening. At first she thought that it could have been Kyle coming home, but when she looked, she saw that Kyle was not home. Instead, there was this man who happened to be Jason himself. He had a knife and he said that he was planning on murdering her in her own home. Now, at this point, that's when Charlotte crosses the line and says that she's calling the cops. When she said that, however, he ends up backing away, only for Kyle to show up and end up knocking him out. Once Jason was knocked out, they ended up calling the cops, and the cops took Jason away. As it turns out, he has been doing this to other people, including his own apartment. There were some attempted break-ins he had done in the past, and he had been known for stalking a couple other people. It wasn't the first time he has done this, so the cops had caught him in the act before he could do something that would harm Charlotte. At the time of the story, though, it was sometime in the spring, and she honestly isn't sure why Jason wanted to target her, but she doesn't even want to know what his intentions were. Now, however, he probably had some issues, but she isn't really too sure why Jason targeted her house. At the time of the story, she wasn't sure about this Jason guy since he was new to the neighborhood, but she ended up realizing that he was pretty much just trying to use her in a way that would send not really good vibes. At the time of the story, she honestly was so naive, thinking that Jason was a cool guy, but however, though, when he broke into the house, that was the final nail in the coffin. That's when she ends up pretty much getting the police involved, and she ends up pressing charges on him. Now, Jason was never seen in that apartment again, and Charlotte is even wondering what he was planning on doing to her. Probably was not good intentions or anything. She still gets shivers to this day and even thinks back on this every time she hears about the name named Jason. But this story, honestly, will still remain in the back of her head. So this took place about maybe be be nearly 10 years ago. And at the time of this story, this really confuses me. A neighbor of mine had asked me to come over to help clean her house a little bit, to which I didn't really have an issue with that. They were nice people at the time until they did something. Now, I will call my neighbor, whose name I will refer to is Anne. Anne was a pretty nice woman, and she looked to be in her mid-50s. She was very kind, and she even really liked a lot of stuff. Now, she was friends with my parents at the time of the story until something happened, which I will not go into. Well, I was helping her clean up the house a little bit, and as we were cleaning up, I end up looking at the basement, and I asked her, "Where does the basement go?" She says it's just a basement and there's nothing really much to bother down there. That was when she and I kept cleaning up and we were taking a break when she said that she had to take a phone call and she would be outside for a little bit. I ended up saying to her that I keep cleaning up in a little bit and then after my break that I would join her. She ends up stepping outside as I look down in the basement. Honestly, I ended up going down there thinking nothing of it. Now, at the time of the story when I looked in the basement, I end up looking around. It looked like a normal basement. There wasn't really anything big going on, but of course, I know not to snoop too much or get into people's businesses, but for some reason I looked in the basement. It looked like a normal basement. There were boxes and stuff piled up, so I thought that maybe it was just a regular basement. It wasn't until maybe a 4 or 5 minutes later, I ended up hearing something what seemed like a cackle. Imagine a witch on cocaine. It ended up scaring me as I wasn't sure where it came from. I ended up going back upstairs and I never told Anne about the basement, fearing that she would get mad or something. So I ended up staying quiet about it, not saying anything about it. It wasn't until maybe a week later when I ended up telling Anne about the basement. Apparently, she was not happy that I went in the basement, but I told her that I heard some cackle in the basement and was afraid that there would be someone down there. She ended up telling me that she ended up hearing that same cackle when she was in the basement when they moved. Apparently, the neighbors said that it could have been some paranormal, but they were still isn't really sure as to who or what was going on down there. But it definitely was something really unsettling. It wasn't until maybe a week later when I went to go clean the house again. This time, she ends up telling me to come down to the basement and that she needed something. At first, I was kind of hesitant, realizing that she was trying to lure me to the basement. Honestly, I felt really uncomfortable by this, as I wasn't really sure if I should go down in the basement or not. I hesitated on going down because I wasn't sure if she had plans to kidnap me or do God knows what. I told her that I couldn't and that I had to go. That was when I end up stepping outside and she ends up chasing me. She chased me until she found my parents picking me up and she ended up walking away. That was when we cut off contact with Anne and never heard or seen from her again. I don't even know if she's still even been doing this to other people, but I even wonder why was she doing this, what her intentions were, and etc. Those are the only things that really boggle my mind to this day. I really don't know what what to think of it, as this could have been ended badly if my parents had not shown up. I don't even know what would have happened then, but I never worked for Anne again, and I don't even know if Anne is still doing this or not, or if she's still out there. I am just glad that Anne never caught me when my parents showed up. Otherwise, it could have been a hell of a lot worse.